Hello, everyone. Welcome to the space. We are super excited to have all of you here. I see that people are still slowly arriving in the space, so we'll just give maybe an extra minute or so. But just to start, a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here with all of us today. We're really excited for this event that we're going to have for an hour and a half altogether. My name is Sarah Diaz-Jordan. I am a diversity and inclusion consultant and a social justice advocate, and I will be moderating today's session. So just maybe to start with a few housekeeping rules to share with all of you. You're welcome in this space, and we're very, very happy to have everybody here. You will realize that all of your mics have been muted by default because there's going to be a lot of us today. So we wanted to make sure that the attention is on the speakers at all times. And just for everybody to know, there is interpretation available today in English, in French, and in Spanish. So you can just turn and go look for the interpretation button that works for you, English, French, and Spanish. And we'll have our amazing interpreters who are going to work hard today for us. And for that, I will ask anybody who will at some point speak today to speak slowly as much as possible to make the work of the interpreters a bit easier. So please speak slowly. If any questions as well when it comes to interpretation, you can drop that in the chat or reach out to us. And we are trying to keep things interactive and dynamic today. So we would love to hear from you, know what you're thinking, any things that you want to share also with the group. I think it's a really rich group of people that is here today. So if you have at some point any questions, any suggestions, links that you want to share with the rest of the people and the participants, please use the chat at all times. You don't need to wait for a presentation to be done to just drop a little question. Our team will be following the question in the chat to make sure that we can also raise those at the later time during the event. So make sure to do that in also the language that feels comfortable for you. I think within our team, we speak a few languages, so we'll make it work. So questions, interactions, comments, and links, please feel free to keep the chat popping throughout today's event. Also, this event is recorded, so it will be available for replay on the website of Cineuropa, who's the partner of today's event. So you'll be able to watch that again if you need to leave earlier or if you arrived late. If you also know of people who wanted to be here today but couldn't make it, please let them know that this is recorded so they'll be able to access that on Cineuropa's website. And maybe just a few words also again to welcome those of you who just joined us and say that we're just really excited to have this event today. It's just a really exciting collaboration that started in the wake of the Me Too movement and, a lot of conversations around the conditions of women in the audiovisual sector and industry. And back then, the motto was 50-50 by 2020. But of course, it did not stop in 2020. That was just the beginning. Today is the 4th edition of this collaboration that has been really rich and great and valuable. So we're just really happy to maintain the momentum to continue these very important conversations and again, to be all together today. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Iris Zapp-Heller for some words of introduction. Thank you so much.
So hi, hello to everybody. On behalf of the EFAD, I'm very happy to welcome you here. EFAD is really proud and happy to organize this 4th event in collaboration with EUROMEI and EVA on women in the European audiovisual production. I think it's really important to keep this subject high on the agenda and to keep monitoring the evolution of the presence of women on and off screen in Europe, and to keep advocating for relevant and efficient actions. At EFAD's level, we have a gender and inclusion working group. So in a nutshell, what do we do? We are exchanging information and best practices amongst our members on gender and inclusion matters, and we are sharing these as much as possible. We are organizing EFAD online talks on specific subjects, like, for example, intimacy coordination, diversity, gender stereotypes, and so on. We are collaborating with EUROMEI. If you're interested, you may have a look on our website. There is a diversity and inclusion mapping, which is really interesting and gives an idea of where the different countries in Europe are standing. This summer in San Sebastian, we had a really interesting talk, which was organized in collaboration with the San Sebastian Film Festival, with Deborah Williams on diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, and the ethics behind. And me, myself, as chair of the group, and I'm really honored to be in this position that I took over from Anna Serna, who funded this group. I am trying to spread the word as much and as broad as I can. I will just share a few examples of what I'm doing there. I have recently been invited by MUTIM, which is the very young Portuguese Association of Women in the Audiovisual Field. They were presenting their very first gender report, and we were trying to get their funding system a little bit closer to gender equality. In summer, I've been to the 4th CIMA Congress in Madrid, gathering women from the big Spanish speaking film world. Or I've been to Stockholm to the capacity building session on how to reduce the gender pay gap, which was really a very important meeting. So as you can see, networking is a major tool, really important. It's really important to keep us mutually informed and updated and to join forces. At the European level, EFAD has advocated in favor of the establishment of regular European statistics by the European Audiovisual Observatory in the past, and now the figures are here. We have them in front of us, and we can compare the situation on every year in all the countries, which is really, really important. And I don't want to spoil the results that will be presented this morning, but I'm so proud of the achievement that I have to mention some of it, as almost all EFAD members have or are putting in place some measures or studies, and all members are giving importance to the topics, which can be seen by the fact that all EFAD members replied to the the Lab Femmes questionnaire this year, which I think is really a great achievement. More and more they are introducing diversity in their actions and policies. Le Lab will show this in more details, analyzing the key trends. Their study is really an important tool for mutual support, encouraging members to draw inspiration from each other. And we are really happy to continue the collaboration with both the European Audiovisual Observatory and Le Lab Femmes de Cinéma. They are monitoring and realizing updates of their studies each year, giving a qualitative and quantitative data analysis. In particular, we collaborate closely with Le Lab Femmes de Cinéma since 2021. They are producing an annual report on all the initiatives taken by EFAD members to improve gender parity and inclusion in cinema. We are aware that there is still a long way to go and there is still a lot to do, but it's really important to continue monitoring and to keep an eye on gender and diversity as well. Thank you very much. This is it from my side.
Thank you so much, Iris. Thank you so much for some great words of introduction. Really happy to have everyone here just to welcome, because I see that some more people have joined and we're not close to 100 people, which is really exciting. For what is going to happen next, we are going to have two different presentations, and then we have a panel conversation. And throughout, again, we'll try to have Q&A after each of the presentations. So feel free at any point to just drop questions in the chat so that we can keep an eye on those. And same for the panel conversation as well. And next up, we are going to have a presentation on the latest gender statistics of the European Audiovisual Observatory. And for this, we have the honor to have Patrizia Simone, film industry analyst of the Department for Market Information of the Observatory, who's going to share with us some data in a presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you to all the organizers for having me. The European Audiovisual Observatory has been monitoring the evolution of gender inequality, I would say, for some years. And in the next 10 minutes, I will provide you with an overview of the latest findings on this topic. So I'll share my screen. And you should be able to see my presentation.
Yes.
Let's have a quick look at the scope and methodology. We drew on data for this analysis. We drew on data taken from our Lumiere database, our database on film animations in Europe. And the scope comprises some 19,000 feature films that were produced and released between 2013 and 2022, and released in at least one theatrical market in Europe. We looked at 6 categories of professionals working off-screen, meaning behind the camera, including directors, screenwriters, producers, cinematographers, composers, and for the first time, we extended to editors as well. We also looked at actors and actresses working in lead roles in feature films, what we call on-screen. Let's take a look at our research angles. We looked at data through 2 angles. First, we focused on the workforce. We considered the number of all active professionals working in a certain role, and we looked at the share of women for each of these roles. So this is the workforce angle, meaning active people, active professionals. And we also focused on the presence of female professionals in film production. To do so, we calculated for each feature films the share of women working in a given role, and we averaged the results for the entire sample. This indicator allows us to have an idea of to what extent women are involved in the production of works. So without further ado, let's take a look at the summary of results for the 5 past years, 2018 to 2022. So let's look at the workforce first. When considering all role combined off screen, so the 6 categories we mentioned before, we can see that only 26% of active professionals are women. This refers to all Europe and to the entirety of the professional segments we mentioned. There are, of course, differences across individual roles. As you can see from this table, women are underrepresented in each of these roles with differences. For instance, among directors, women represent 26% of active workforce, while the gender gap is far more pronounced among cinematographers and composers, when women account for barely 11 and 10% of the workforce, respectively. However, the share of active women is higher among producers, 35%, and editors, 1/3 of the workforce. And among screenwriters, we are a little bit lower, 29%. If we look at the other angle, so the average share of women per film, for each category, we see that this share is slightly lower than the share of women active in the workforce. It's 24%, all roles combined, compared to 26% in the workforce. And this can be seen for each individual categories. For instance, the directors, the share in the workforce for women is 26%. And when we look at the average share of women per film, is 23%. And why is that? The reason is that women tend to be working on fewer films than their male counterparts, and they are less likely to be prolific in a way. So this affects the figures. And this is true for all categories analyzed, except for film editors, where the levels of activity are actually comparable across the two genders. This data don't show the figures for actors and actresses, for performers active in a lead role in feature films, where we are observing a much higher share of women compared to off-screen roles. We are around 41% of women in the workforce, as well in feature films. And the levels of activities for performance are comparable across the two genders. Let's also look at more specific insights from the report. You might wonder, how fast is this improving, if this is improving at all? In this graph, you can have a look at the share of female professionals, all role combined. So all off-screen roles combined, the 6 category we mentioned in the beginning. And we can see that there has been some progression. We are going from 21% in 2013 to some 25% in 2022. Please take into account that 2022 should be still considered provisional, since we only include films released in 2022. So films produced in 2022, but released in 2023 are not part of the sample. Anyway, the share of women in the workforce is progressing slowly. And so is the average share of female professional per film. So the production of feature films by women. This is also true when we look at film directors. As you can see from this graph, the average share of female directors per film has progressed from around 20% in 2013 to around 25% in 2021. Let's leave out 2022 for now. When we look at debut films, so what we presume are the first feature by individual directors, we see that the average share of female directors per film is actually higher than for films in general. This means that the situation might improve for new generations of female filmmakers. But the other side of the coin is that this means that it might be actually harder for filmmakers, female filmmakers, to get to direct a second feature after their directorial debut. In fact, the average share of female director per films, it's lower than for subsequent films. As you can see from the graph, it's the gray line. Now, these are pan-European figures. As you can expect, there are quite significant differences across individual countries. As you can see from this map, the darker the violet color, the higher the average share of film directors per film. So in Europe, these figures refer to the 5-year period, 2018 to 2022. And the average share of female director per film ranges between 8% in Turkey to above 34% in the Nordic countries and Austria. And not films are equal when it comes to gender equality. As you probably know, documentary is the genre where we observe the highest share, the highest presence of female professionals. This graph is about the workforce. So the share of female professionals active in each type of film by professional categories. And you can see that the share of women in the documentary is higher for all categories. Cinematographers might seem to be an exception, but in fact, this is due to a very limited sample for animation, which appears to be the genre with the highest share of female cinematography. But this is in a way false result, since this is based on shares, and the sample for animated films with a female cinematography is around 20 films only. But as you can see, for instance, for directors, the share of women per film is 31% for documentary versus 21% for fiction films. And in our report, we also looked at gender-specific working patterns. And we observed that women tended to work in teams with other colleagues in the same role more frequently than men. As a consequence, female professionals were less likely to be the sole professional director or screenwriter credited in a given role for a film. This is particularly relevant for screenwriting, a role where it's common to have several professionals working in teams on the same film. Looking at films by at least one female screenwriter, only one third was written by one individual female screenwriter. If you look at the films co-written by at least one male screenwriter, the percentage of film by individual male screenwriters is higher, it's 43%. And interestingly, women are also more likely to work in gender mixed teams than men. So when women were co-writing a film with a colleague, it was mostly, in most cases, in 86% of cases, in partnership with a male colleague. And another interesting finding is that in feature films directed by women, the average share of female professional per films, considering all crew roles, was considerably higher than in other films. Here you can see, for instance, that films directed by at least one woman have an average share of female screenwriters per film of 77% compared to 17% for films directed by men. Now, it's important to point out that in Europe, a huge proportion of feature films, around 70%, is written and directed by the same person. So we are possibly including many films where the director is the same person as the screenwriter, which of course in a way is biasing our results on gender. However, to control for that, we have excluded films written and directed by the same person. And even when we do so, we can observe that there is a positive correlation between having a female director helming a film project and a higher share of screenwriters in the film. So in this case, you will have films co-directed by at least a woman would have a far higher share of screenwriters in the team compared to films directed by men. We are in fact close to parity for screenwriters, and we are also close to parity for editors. I'm always talking about films directed by women. The results are higher in each professional categories when we compare films directed by women and other films. Interestingly, always looking at films directed by women, we saw that the female presence in film crews did not really differ significantly across film genres, which we observed for films in general. So we can see that the general share of female professional per film, considering crew roles, is above 40%, regardless of the film type, the film genre, when we consider films directed by women. Whereas when we look at films in general, there is quite a lot of variation across film genre. And again, when looking at films by at least one female directors, we observe that the average share of female professional per film, so presence of women in film crews, is progressing faster than in other films. Now, we don't have qualitative data on these figures, but we could assume that several factors could play a role regarding the correlation between having a female film director and the higher share of female workforce in the crews. It could be that when women have the chance to choose their teams, they are presumably more aware about gender imbalances and gender-related issues. So they might have a more extended network and perhaps a less biased, let's say, network of professionals. Also, the initiatives launched by film agencies, so industry support initiatives, might have played a role in spurring this development for films directed by women. And finally, we looked at another thorny question, money. There is a disparity in production budget across, depending on the gender of the film director. We do not have production budget data in Lumiere, so for this type of data, we drew on a survey we launched across European film agencies that were able to provide us with gender disaggregated budget figures for feature films. And we noticed that on average for 2021 budgets, the last figures we have available, fiction films by female directors tended to be some 20% lower than fiction films by male directors. The gender gap is less pronounced for documentaries, only where films by female directors are only 8% lower than in terms of budgets than films by male directors. Now, this figure should be interpreted with caution because there might be some selection bias in the sample. We do not have data for the entirety of European production countries. And also the agencies who provided us with data are the ones that are most likely to engage in gender equality related activities and strategies. And so they are collecting gender disaggregated data is the first step towards normally launching an action plan or a strategy. Furthermore, some of the countries only include films that benefited from direct public funding. So this might mean that they were, in a way, concerned by some gender equality strategy. So this is to say that we presume that considering the entirety of European production countries, this gap might be more pronounced. So a quick recap. Women are still lagging behind in the workforce in the European film industry. They tend to be less prolific, and they tend to work in teams more often than men, and often with male colleagues. The documentary films are the type of production with a higher presence of female professionals. And there is a higher share of women in film crews in films directed by women. There are still disparity in production budgets, and the share of women is progressing quite slowly, with significant variation across individual countries. So in short, there is still a long way to go, as Iris said. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Super insightful, really, really great to have your presentation to kick us off. Thank you. Maybe just one question that popped in the chat here from Daphne. Would it be possible to extend the sample of data to more positions off screen?
Interesting questions. Yes, we have already done so. At the beginning, we were only focusing on directors, for which data comes directly from our Lumiere database. Then we have extended to screenwriters and then to producers, composers, and cinematographers, and now editors. For categories other than directors, we rely on data sets made publicly available from IMDb. And the sample shrinks for each category. In fact, the sample for screenwriter is much richer than the sample for instance, film editors. And you can check the number of films in the sample in our report, which is available online. This means that the level of representativity, in fact, might differ across category, and we are always carefully assessing representativity before starting out with a new professional categories. So we might, in fact, try to evaluate the opportunity to also extend this to other categories, but this is depending on data availability. Hope this replies to your question, Daphne.
Thank you so much. Great. I see another question in the chat that asks from Leslie, I believe. Do we know how the data in Europe compares to other continents, particularly North America? I don't know if you have any insights on that, maybe.
Yeah, well, the North America is covered by the Gina Davis initiative, and they publish reports that focus on the top 100 films by box office. So these reports can be freely consulted, and you can find them on their website. And for instance, actors, actresses, I mentioned that we are in Europe around 41%, and last time I checked in the US and in Canada, we were around the same levels. But of course, I would invite you to check any updates on their site directly.
Thank you so much. Maybe one last question. You did mention within the presentation that documentary is where there's the higher share of women professionals. I was wondering if there's any insights of why that is.
Well, our intuitive insight is that documentary are on average far less expensive to make than live action fiction films. And as many reports from national film agencies have pointed out, there is a strong link between, let's say, money and finances and gender disparity. So the higher the budget, less likely will be a woman to be entrusted with a film project. So this seems to be the most likely explanation confirmed by national studies.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Patricia. Thanks for again for an amazing presentation. I also want to thank Edel, who in the chat did put the link directly for the slides actually in the presentation that are available on the European Audiovisual Observatory website. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I will invite anyone else who has further questions to just put them in the chat, and Patricia will be able to answer to you directly. You can also interact. I see that there is quite a bit of interaction in the chat, which is great. So keep that going. And we are now going to move to the next presentation from Lab Femmes de Cinéma, where we're going to have Lise Perrotet, General Coordinator, and Fabienne Sylvestre, co-founder of the lab, presenting us the 2023 update of the Lab Femmes de Cinéma study. Thank you so much, Lise and Fabienne, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. We are very happy, together with Lise, to present the outlines of the 2023 study that we are releasing actually today in connection with this event. Le Lab is a think tank based in France, working on parity and mixity, both in the individual field, both behind and in front of the camera. We created this study in 2016 at a time when almost no figure at European level existed. We have updated it every year since then in collaboration and in partnership with the EAO. Patricia, it's really a pleasure to work with you. We put the statistics actually they publish into perspective with the measures adopted by the various countries. We also collaborate with the EFAD since 2021. Thanks to Julie, Jeanne, Ariel, and also Iris, our links with the institutes are now more regular, and they all review and validate the study before its publication. We also benefit from the support of the French Ministry of Culture and of the CNC. Thanks to them for that. A special thanks to Daphne Tepper for allowing us to present this study at these events, and also to all the film agencies that have collaborated with us for this study. So with this study, we aim actually at presenting a synthesis of all the existing measures and policies adopted in Europe to promote inclusion and in the cinema industry. Our study is therefore both an annual assessment, but also it is a collection of good practices, a kind of benchmark at the European level. A few words regarding our methodology. We send to each country's national film institute some questions to monitor measures and policies put in place to address gender disparities in their cinemas industry. The information presented in this study is a synthesis of the 2023 answer, their answer from the past years, and also complementary data collected from their website. Of course, there's a double temporality that exists between the measures adopted by the countries and the data collected at the EAO. It is important to bear in mind that while the policies adopted necessarily have consequences on the statistics, they are not immediate. This year, 36 countries responded to our request. Liz, who both contacted the institute and wrote the study, will now be able to present the main findings from our 2023 update. It will be brief. You'll find all the information in our study, and actually it is released today, so don't hesitate to share it. Liz, I'll let you the floor.
So I'm going to present 6 of the main findings of this year's study. So first, this year, 15 countries have been working at international and national level in order to promote parity, but in an overall search of diversity. For instance, at the international level, we can think of the New Dawn initiative, where several funds are collaborating in order to promote inclusion in the industry. And at the national level, we can think of the United Kingdom institutes, where their goal is to have an industry that is representative of the United Kingdom population, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. The second trend is that in the pace of the Me Too movement, the institutes are intensifying their measures to fight against gender-based violence. 16 countries are committed to this topic. And in the recent year, we have noticed a particular emphasis on fighting against gender-based violence on set, with the Film Institute encouraging the film crews to collaborate with intimacy coordinators. A great example of a country that has been doing a lot regard the fighting against gender-based violence would be France. The French CNC is setting up a system that to get fundings, you have to
comply with specific obligations regarding the fight of sexual harassment. For instance, the legal manager has to follow a training and get a certification in order to get a funding. Since having children penalizes more women than men in all of the industry in the workforce, 6 countries are now trying to work in order to create a more equal, in order to create creative conditions more equal between men and women, and are trying to support those who are parents and who are working in the industry. So 6 countries, it's not a lot, but it's quite recent, and we think that this trend is going to grow in the years to come, and it's a deep need and a deep wish by women filmmakers that the Institute work on this topic. An example would be Austria, where the childcare costs are eligible when asking for funding. Another trend is that the institutes are now using the funding application as a tool to promote parity and diversity in the industry. It's the case of 13 countries, and it's there is 2 main goals with that. First, it's a simple way to collect data in a very efficient way, but it's also a way to raise awareness of those asking for fundings through compulsory or optional questions. For example, in Denmark, when applying for support, the producers, they are required to provide information regarding the gender composition of the technical, creative, and casting team, the salary distribution and the percentage pay gap, and the number of dialogue for each member of the cast regarding gender. So it's a way to collect precise data regarding that gender, but also to raise awareness of those asking for fundings. One of the trends that seems to stand out this year is that the institutes are working on developing the career support for women filmmakers. It's the case of 10 countries, and they are placing the emphasis on coaching, mentoring, setting up special training courses, networking events in order to connect, to help the women filmmaker to climb the ladder more quickly and to stay in the industry once they get their first feature film. For instance, in Belgium, on the Flemish side, there is a training and an empowerment program to women and non-binary director and producers in order to help them, to give them access to concrete tools regarding leadership, regarding networking, and so far and so on. And finally, the last trend is that the centers are now training the decision makers to deconstruct unconscious bias and to fight stereotypes, because it is important to know that when a film is supported, they convey a certain image, and the 10 institutes are now working on unconscious bias and training their team. For instance, the Icelandic Film Center's consultants, they are instructed that when when reading a project, they have to evaluate if the project favors multidimensional female character, and if the project passed the Bechdel-Wallace test. And just before the conclusion, a quick word on the quotas. It's not a trend because actually the institutes are still quite reluctant to implement quotas. 3 countries have forms of hybrid quotas, but only one has some really strong quotas in place. It's Spain, and in Spain, a share of the total budget of the institutes must be given to projects led by female directors, and it is an unprecedented policy, really ambitious, and we think that it's going to have some major impact on the figure of the Spain institutes in the years to come.
Yes, to conclude, we can say that the last couple of years give us the feeling that the themes of parity and diversity are being addressed politically by an increasing number of film institutes year after year, and in greater depth each year by those who had started working on those subjects years ago. Since we now know that there can be no real progress on these subjects without ambitious policies, we welcome this trend, of course, the effects of which we sincerely hope that to be able to monitor in the statistics in the next few years. This growing political awareness in different countries is good news, for sure, but we need to keep up the pressure on the subject because the statistics change very slowly, as Patricia reminded us. Let's not forget that behind this underrepresentation of women filmmakers, there are stories that are not being told, reservoirs of creativity that need to be unleashed. That time has come. Until parity is achieved, we will continue to do this meticulous work year after year. We are ready for your questions now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Liz and Fabian, for this great presentation. I see that there is, to start with the questions around, do this figure apply to EU countries? Yes, and thank you, Quentin, for answering and providing a screenshot as well. Indeed, this study was based on EU countries. Another question that I see in the chat would be if you know if in Denmark, the Film Fund is publishing the gender pay data that it's collecting.
I don't think so. I think it's for their internal use. I'm going to check on the study right now, but I don't think so. I don't think they publish it.
Noted. Thank you. I was wondering also, because you did mention that there are 6 countries as part of all the ones that you studied and had in the report that supports parenting, which I would be super interesting to know, because I know that this is a big thing and hurdle when it comes to women in the industry. If you could mention which one. I do think you mentioned Austria as an example. Which are the 6 ones? It's
also Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Croatia, and Slovenia. And it's 6, yeah. And actually, we are also a think tank, the lab, and we are also meeting with a lot of filmmakers, women filmmakers, and it's a topic that really is brought up a lot by the filmmakers. And actually, a filmmaker told us that she couldn't go on tour because the childcare costs were too expensive compared to the money that she would earn promoting her film. And so we think that it's a really important topic.
And I can just add that it's a topic that is not only concerning women in the film industry. We also have a working session with women invested in this issue on all the cultural sector at the Ministry of Culture in France. And actually, it's really one of the topics that rise up as one of the most important to deal with.
Super, thank you so much. I see a question in the chat asking which are the 3 countries that opted for a system of hybrid quota?
It's Austria, Norway, and the United Kingdom. And it's quota with you will find all of the information in the study, but it's a quota that are goals, but there is no how these sanctions if the quotas are not achieved, but it's a goal. They have really precise figures that regarding all of the positions and the different people working in the industry. And so yeah, it's Austria, Norway, and the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom, actually, their quotas are not only regarding gender, but they are really precise because they want to be, just like I said, a representative of the United Kingdom population. And so they're really, there are a lot of categories, and it's really detailed quota in front and behind of the camera.
Super interesting. Thank you so much. One last question from the chat before we move on. Do we know how gender parity generally compares between film versus premium series?
Actually, we wrote a note a couple of years ago. I can't remember perfectly, but if I remember well, it was, Fabienne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember that it was a bit better in the series industry. It was because we compared we used North America figures, because in France, it was almost the same, I guess, compared to the film industry, but the American figures were better regarding the American features. But I will link the note. It was not a study because we collected the study that we could find online, but I will find the note on the chart because it was 2 years ago, I guess, so I'm not completely sure.
And it's difficult to compare because we don't speak about the same things regarding films and regarding series, because regarding films, we are interested by the number of filmmakers, and regarding series, it's also about
Showrunner.
Yes, showrunners, exactly. So it's filmmakers both and showrunners. So it's difficult to compare, actually. Yes, but basically we have the feeling that there are perhaps a bit more place for women in the series than in the film right now.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, Liz and Fabienne. We are now going to move on. So I'll invite anybody else who has other questions to please drop them in the chat. I'd love to see that actually many people can answer some of these questions, which I'm sure can create a really nice debate. So please continue to do that. And Liz and Fabienne also, of course, feel free to answer all of these questions as well. Thank you so much again for this great presentation. And now we are going to make space for our panel conversations, for which we are going to have Enrico Vanucci, Deputy Director of EUROMEI, Daphne Roca, Board Member of MIA, Mujeres en la Industria de la Animación, and Daphne Tepper, Policy Director, Media, Entertainment and Arts sector of Europa, joining the panel conversation here. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today. And to start with, again, anybody who has questions and comments, please feel free to drop these in the chat. We'll have some time towards the end for questions and answers. And I'd love to start with you, Enrico, asking you, if EUROMEI has been addressing gender equality for more than a decade now. So it's been a while through different strategies and actions that you have been working on. So I would love if you could maybe tell us a bit more about what specifically has been put into place, what has been achieved so far, highlights that maybe you want to tell us about that you're proud of specifically. We'd love to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to say hi to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. And I think that, first of all, I should remind you all what EUROMEI is. Contrary to the people who spoke so far, we actually don't look at the market as a whole, but we refer to our own activities, and we do try to do some activities to raise awareness and have an impact on films applying for support at EUROMEI. So we don't have a general overview. Some comparisons, it's a very limited, it's a privileged point of view on a specific niche of the film market, mainly in Europe, but also in Canada. So I think this is important to highlight when comparing our experience with a general overview of the market. So just very quickly, EUROMEI is a cultural fund of the Council of Europe, which is the organization, the pan-European organization upholding the fundamental values of the continent: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. EUROMEI started its work in 1989, supporting the European film industry, encouraging cooperation across borders, and promoting co-productions. This is the main aim of ours, to support films in co-production terms, meaning bringing together professionals from different countries belonging to EUROMEI. We have now, as of today, 39 member states, 38 of which in Europe, plus Canada. We have a budget of above 25 million euros, and we have 3 meetings where we value projects. What we've been doing, as it was mentioned, by Sarah when introducing me, it's actually, we are very proud to have started looking at gender equality issues since 2013. So it's really 10 years, more than 10 years. And I think, we had an impact, which I will be presenting to you, especially if you consider, how things have changed to projects applying for support from EUROMEI. But and I would like also to remind, in 2013, the first gender equality working group was established within the board of management of EUROMEI, where the national representatives of member states sit. And so the issues was first looked at. It took a year for the first strategy to be devised. And one of the first, so in 2014, the first strategy lasting until 2017 was established. The framework was especially to have an awareness raising, because at that point in time, discussions about gender equality in the film sector was not as common as it is today. A main activity, which proved to be quite relevant, was in 2016 also the establishment of the Audencia Prize or award. I don't know if you're aware of it, which is a 30,000 euros prize, which is handed out in different film festivals throughout member states of EUROMEI to a film director in order to support the next project of these film directors. This also to help female directors to move on in their career, because as it was mentioned before, sometimes it's difficult for female directors to move from one project to the next. Another main milestone in our activities was the adoption by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe in 2017 of the Council of Europe recommendation on gender equality in the audiovisual sector, which as of today remains a quite unique legal text instrument that has no, as far as I know, that has no other comparable text in any other continent, which invites member states, governments of member states of EUROMEI to actually work so as to ensure that more equality is assured in the audiovisual sector. If you have the time to look at it, it's really worth. It's quite specific, and actually in the drafting of the work, which was carried out by the EUROMEI, with cooperation by EUROMEI, we also had experts from beyond Europe in order to try, and from UNESCO in order to try and come up with this document, which is possibly not well known throughout Europe. Then we had other gender equality strategies, and then in 2022, actually the gender equality and working group enlarged its mandate to encompass also diversity activities. So nowadays we have two strategies which are being brought into line in order to try to tackle the two fields of gender equality and diversity to a larger extent. Although, I mean, whereas for gender equality, many results have been achieved, for diversity, we're just starting to work in cooperation with our member states. Just to highlight, very quickly, what the upside of our work, I would like to highlight in terms of the amounts awarded. As mentioned, we are looking at EUROMEI work in terms of films supported by us. When we started, checking our figures in 2012, 93% of the amounts awarded as support by EUROMEI went to male-directed films, 93%, and 7 to women-directed films. Last year, the last year for which we have figures, 2022, 52% went to male-directed films and 48% to female-directed films. So, it's quite, close to 50-50, 52 to 48, whereas in the beginning it was 93-7. As you can see, this is a major change. This was done by actually highlighting how important this dimension it is for us in terms of the support to be handed out. And I think, there were some measures which I will be detailing maybe later on, but another main issue, as it was done by our colleagues of the observatory, we also tried to enlarge our view from film directed by women to also take into account both cast and crew to see what projects have, a female presence, a relevant female presence in their production. always based on information that we receive by producers. This is important to keep in mind. You know, we are based our figures on the information that producers provide when applying for support. And we've come to, you know, a rule of thumb, you know, to say that female projects are those that in terms of cast and crew have more than 60% female presence, less than 40% female roles. It's what we define male projects, whereas between 40 and 60, we consider them balanced. And in terms of balanced project, over the last 5 years, balanced projects moved from 26% balanced and female projects from 26 to 64%. So there is clearly a trend toward a higher presentation of female projects. In many discussions, when I present these figures, I seem to be a little bit upbeat, but I think this is also due to the fact that these figures refer to projects applying at EUROMEI, and we have kind of built a reputation for being, you know, very sensitive to these issues. So I'm very much aware this is, you know, there is still a lot of work to be done, and of course also considering female and balanced projects together may be a little bit, you know, biased in statistical terms, but it's a way to see how the opposite, you know, the male-directed films are being have dramatically dropped in terms of representation within the sample that our projects represent. I think I'll stop there, but if anyone has any questions, I'm sorry I haven't been able to look at the chat in this regard.
No worries. Thank you so much, Enrico. We will have time for questions and answer afterwards, but indeed, I will invite anybody who has questions to drop them so that we can come back to them afterwards. Thank you so much. And please bear with us. I see that there are some issues with interpretation. We'll make sure to fix all of that so that everybody can hear in their respective language. Thank you to the interpreters as well. All right, so I now have a question for Dasil. Dasil Roca, I just maybe would like to have a broad question in terms of what is the situation from your point of view right now for women in the animation sector in Spain? Any evolution, you know, things that you've observed, highlights that you would like to share with us today?
Awesome. Thank you first to all of you, all the insights for every speaker. It was really amazing. And now I'm gonna start to talk in Spanish, so you make sure you adapt it. So buenos días a todos, un placer estar aquí.
Hello and good morning to all of you. I am in the...
Y hoy me gustaría compartir con ustedes algunas reflexiones sobre la situación de las mujeres en el sector de la animación en España y la evolución que hemos observado en estos últimos años, basándonos en las conclusiones del informe MIA comparativo de los años 2020, 2021 y 2022. En los últimos años hemos sido testigos todos de un impulso global en la producción de contenido animado centrado en personajes femeninos. En el contexto específico de España, y según los datos de los largometrajes de 2022, de los 136 personajes registrados, apenas el 31% corresponden a personajes femeninos. Aunque se evidencia una mejora en comparación con periodos anteriores, también se señala la persistencia de concepciones arcaicas que consideran a las mujeres como una minoría. Otra cuestión clave radica, como han comentado las compañeras, en indagar quiénes son los que dirigen, escriben y lideran este contenido. De esta forma, los datos revelan un claro sesgo de género en la ocupación de roles de liderazgo en la industria. Al analizar áreas cruciales como la dirección, la producción y el guión, podemos observar una marcada disparidad entre la presencia de mujeres y hombres. En el último año, en la categoría de largometrajes, las mujeres ocupaban solo el 25% de los puestos de dirección, el 21% de producción y, sin embargo, como punto de inflexión, conseguimos el 52% en guión, lo que refleja una paridad concreta en este puesto y en este año. Estos datos reflejan un avance bastante bueno con respecto al año 2020, cuando las cifras eran considerablemente inferiores, con un 0% de mujeres en dirección, 28% en producción y 14% en guión. Y una notable mejora en comparación con el 2021, donde las cifras mostraban un preocupante 0% en dirección y guión y solo un 27% en producción. De esta forma podemos decir que es positivo que hemos notado y hemos experimentado una ligera mejora en la presencia de mujeres en los roles de liderazgo en este último año del 2022. Pero no podemos ignorar que el techo de cristal sigue siendo una realidad palpable en la industria de la animación en España y podríamos decir en Europa. En resumen, aunque hemos avanzado, aún nos enfrentamos a desafíos persistentes y es responsabilidad de todos contribuir a la creación de un entorno más inclusivo, diverso en la animación europea, a través de iniciativas como esta, que apoyan y promueven la participación activa de las mujeres en los roles de liderazgo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Dacil. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that everybody was able to go into the respective language to hear this super insightful presentation. Thank you so much. I will now move to Daphne Tepper with a question around so the work that has been going on. So Uni, MEI, and the EFAD network have been working now for a while on closing the gender gap in the audiovisual sector. So maybe if you could tell us a bit more about this work, how did it come about? Any highlights also that you'd like to share with us?
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning to everyone. It's nice to see you all online, that many people online. It's really great, and thank you for all the information shared till now. So indeed, we've been we have started a year or two ago some work around the gender pay gap with our affiliates at EUROMEI, so trade unions in the European audiovisual sector, and the EFAD network. And as we know, the gender pay gap, it's a very important dimension of gender equality, but it's not necessarily a dimension that's been worked on a lot, at least in our sector in the last years. So we decided to address this. As most of you might know, at EU level, when looking at all the sectors of the economy, the most recent numbers we have concerning the gender pay gap are from 2021. And on average, the hourly pay gap between working women and men in the EU, so not only in our sectors, for the entire economy, it's at 12.7%. And economic studies in the US, they show that a 13% difference in hourly pay between women and men accounts for a lifetime loss of almost $400,000. So there is no small gender pay gap. That's something now that I want to always mention when I speak of the gender pay gap. There is no small gender pay gap, and we have to address it. And also, as we know, the gender pay gap, it has a tremendous impact on the quality of women's lives, on the lives of their families, on their risk of exposure to poverty, and also on the persisting pension pay gap, which is at around 29% in the EU now. So the causes for the gender pay gap are numerous. We know that women are underrepresented in leadership and senior roles. This is the famous glass ceiling. Working hours, women are more likely than men to work part-time or in flexible roles, often linked to caring duties. Time out of the workforce, women are also more likely than men to take career breaks to raise children or for other caring duties. And when they return to work after those breaks, they frequently find they have fallen behind in terms of earning power or promotion opportunities. And then also, finally, there is the great impact of feminized jobs, so historic, ingrained workplace gender stereotyping that led to certain roles being held predominantly by women. So in results, you have kind of female jobs that are very often undervalued in terms of pay rates. And I think another important element to keep in mind when speaking of the gender pay gap is that it is very slow to be corrected. It seems to be even slower than the overall gender equality elements. At EU level, for example, data shows that the pay gap only went down 3.5% in 10 years. So this is like way too slow. And of course, the lack of pay transparency means that paid discrimination often goes undetected, and it can be too easily neglected or even denied. If you don't have numbers, I think Quentin said it in the chat, problems doesn't exist. So considering some of the data we have for the audiovisual sector, and that we heard already some of it today, women concentrating in certain roles, women leaving the sector mid-career, as well as certain characteristics of the sector work organization, location shooting, for example, long working hours, we knew that we had to work on the gender pay gap also in the audiovisual sector. And finally, earlier this year, the EU adopted a new directive on pay transparency, and this gave us a great and concrete hook to address the issue and explore its different dimensions in the audiovisual sector. So, as I mentioned, we started working on the topic with our affiliates at EUROMEI, so national trade unions representing audiovisual professionals across the EU, and the EVA network. We started collecting information. Is data available on the gender pay gap in the European audiovisual sector? What do we know of the causes of the gender pay gap in our sector in particular? And so we initiated discussions and consultations with different stakeholders, producers, other types of employers, film funds, women collectives, unions, etc. And the first thing we realized is that actually very little information was available on the gender pay gap in our sector, but that when it was available, such as in France through the Observatoire de l'égalité, so the Observatory of Equality of the CNC, the French Film Fund, or in relation to staff of large-scale sector organizations, such as broadcasters, a gap, surprise, surprise, existed, and that it could be actually very important in some positions or category of jobs. It could go up to 30%, so 30% in certain occupations. What we also realized is that to address pay transparency and to close the gender pay gap, we would have to face a number of challenges that are specific to our sector, such as the fact that so many professionals in the audiovisual sector are working freelance, self-employed, on short-term basis, so are not on the payroll. And that also so many employers in our sector are small or very small employment units, and therefore they're generally full of the table when considering transparency obligations that come out of legislation. But still, it didn't discourage us, and we started working on several tools and resources. So we are preparing a mini campaign to make sure that the new EU directive, when it's transposed in the different EU countries, it has as much impact as possible in our sector in the years to come. We're also working on a discussion paper on how we could extend data collection on the gender pay gap in our sector, and we have some leads that we want to explore. We're also working on tools and advice for employers, even very small production units, on how they could reduce the gender pay gap. And finally, we're also working on tips and tools for individuals, professionals, on better negotiating their rates and on getting rid of the taboo of discussing money, which is in our sector, as in many other sectors of the society, still very, very strong. So those are all the things we're working on right now. It's still the beginning of the journey, but we're convinced this is a very, very important topic, and we hope we can have a positive impact in the future. I'll stop here for now.
Many thanks, Daphne. It's really, really great insights. Thank you. I will now go back to Enrico for another questions that I have for you. Based on the experience that you have at EUROMEI and all of the work that you have been doing, from your opinion and your perspective, what do you think are the actions taken by film funds that have the biggest impact on gender equality?
As I was mentioning before, I can mainly refer to our own experience, meaning the one of EUROMEI, which was actually quite successful. And then I'm also aware of measures taken by specific national funds, which are represented on our board. We've been also working, I'd like, to remind, as colleagues did previously, that, in this field, we've been working closely in close cooperation with the the EFAD, and Iris actually was a past president of our Gender Equality Working Group when she was the representative of Austria on our board, and with the observatory also for data. But in the activities that we actually took at our level and that proved to be quite effective, were at the beginning when assessing projects, and there were an ex aequo between a female-directed and a male-directed film, was to give priority systematically to female-directed films. This is something which allowed a little bit more funding to be channeled towards female-directed films. Since 2022, an additional measure was adopted, and it's still in place, which is to raise the ceiling of support provided to female directors, whereas usually EUROMEI does not, as a top financer, doesn't provide more than 17%, used to provide more than 17% of the overall budget of a film. Now, when it is a female director directed film, we actually raise this ceiling up to 25%, which allows a little bit more money to be channeled this way. And also, to take into account, one of the reasons for doing it is that we actually noticed that budgets of female directed films were lower than that of men. Then another measure which was quite effective was the Audiencia Prize. This is something we've been discussing with some associations as well, and I think this is something important, as I mentioned before, in order to provide means to kickstart projects from female directors that may encounter problems when moving on in their career after, from the first to the second film, to the second to the third, to have some seed funding for their things, or beyond the acknowledgement of their past work through the prize itself. What we've been doing, of course, we've been doing, raising awareness throughout Europe. We've been active in all our member states, and we've been providing also sponsored activities in the female sectors by other associations, which, by making it possible for associations to have the means to carry out activities which we deem to be effective and relevant, and also to pay scholarships to female directors attending film schools. That's something we've been doing for a long time, and that proved also to be quite useful in the development of the career of young female directors. And finally, this kind of support activities we've also implemented specifically for Ukrainian female directors in the framework of some activities that EUROMEI implemented in support of the film industry in Ukraine after the aggression by the Russian Federation. These in general terms, as far as we are concerned. On a personal level, on a personal note, I think, that I'm aware of the measures in Spain. I think they've been quite, the quotas, it was mentioned before, it's the only country having introduced this kind of a measure with a clear impact on that. But I think it's, it's also important to keep speaking about these issues, to raise awareness and to make it clear that it's in the interest of the overall industry to actually carry out activities and to enhance female participation in the film industry. And to a certain extent, I also think it's a cultural thing. So you can see the difference from our point of view in member states, depending, on the culture of the countries concerned. So I think it's very important to discuss these issues, to present figures, and to try and raise awareness in states where things may be moving more slowly. But I think, as it was mentioned by Patrizia before, the trend may be too slow, but it's in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. I'll now also have a similar questions for Dasil when it comes to, your experience at MIA. Maybe some of the things that you could share with us in terms of what is the most useful, what kind of initiatives really support the presence of women in the animation industry.
Desde MIA, las tres iniciativas que encontramos más útiles así a nivel más divulgativo, por decirlo de una manera, para apoyar la presencia de las mujeres en la industria de la animación son las siguientes. 1. Fondos de apoyo a proyectos de animación liderados por mujeres. Así como decía el compañero Enrico, pues con la última y cuarta ola del feminismo que comentaban anteriormente las compañeras, ha sido impulsada por el movimiento Me Too. que ha tenido un impacto global. Los consumidores demandan más contenido creado por mujeres y protagonizado por mujeres. Estos fondos son fundamentales para apoyar a las mujeres en el desarrollo de proyectos, visibilizar su trabajo y potenciar las narrativas femeninas, que no solo generan historias innovadoras, sino también productos rentables. Desde MIA realizamos esta función con el proyecto Mi Anima. Mi Anima es un programa de incubación, formación y pitching para proyectos de animación creados por mujeres en Iberoamérica. Durante 5 meses, las beneficiarias recibirán formación online y mentorización personalizada por parte de profesionales del sector para ayudarlas a desarrollar su proyecto y convertirlo en una producción sólida y con proyección internacional. 2. La creación de redes y asociaciones de mujeres en la animación. A lo largo de nuestra trayectoria como profesionales en esta industria hemos observado que, al igual que en muchas otras, la obtención del empleo a menudo se facilita a través de recomendaciones y contactos. Es por eso que consideramos fundamental establecer sólidas conexiones entre nosotras. Además, estas redes no solo abordan esta problemática, sino que también sirven como canales para fomentar el aprendizaje y facilitar la transferencia de conocimiento de las profesionales más experimentadas y más senior y las más jóvenes en el campo. De esta manera no solo fortalecemos la presencia de mujeres en la animación, sino que también contribuimos a la promoción de un entorno de trabajo más equitativo y enriquecedor para todas. Y 3, programas, charlas y coloquios como este, de sensibilización sobre la realidad de la industria en materia de género. Es importante que todos los agentes implicados en la industria sean conscientes de la realidad de sesgo de género en la animación y en el cine en general. Por eso creemos que es necesario organizar programas y charlas de sensibilización sobre esta problemática, como este coloquio. Estas charlas creemos que deben estar dirigidas a todos los niveles de la industria, desde los altos cargos, el equipo técnico artístico, hasta los profesionales de recursos humanos. Solo con el compromiso de todos los agentes implicados en la industria será posible crear una industria más diversa e inclusiva. De esta forma, nos gustaría animar a todas las mujeres estudiantes y profesionales de la animación que se sumen a nuestras redes de MIA y que participen en nuestros proyectos, porque juntas podemos crear una industria más justa y equitativa para todas.
Sorry, gracias, Dasil. And I think this has also been mentioned a few times, but definitely networking, mentoring is super, super important. So I also hope that within the chat, maybe people can exchange, a contact or like check each other on LinkedIn to make sure we create connections as well today. Now, another question that I have still in the frame of actions and things that can be done for Daphne regarding the gender pay gap, specifically any key action, concrete things that could be done straight away.
Yeah, I think it's great that already the Enrico and Dasil, they already suggested concrete actions. We also have some concrete actions. We think there are things that can be done today by most of us in order to start working on closing the gender pay gap. First of all, if you work for an organization, if you collect data in the sector, you can explore if and how you can try and collect gender pay data. That is, of course, anonymized and can respect the GDPR. That's not an issue. But of course, film funds and other financing bodies, commissioner of works, they can explore that. Do you have access to gender pay data? Can you collect it, analyze it? As we heard, it's the case in Denmark, and it will be interesting I will try and reach out to them to see whether we can access this data. If you're an employer in the sector, if you're a producer or any type of other types of employer, you can also start collecting and analyzing your gender pay gap. You can do that through your accounting system. And we believe that it should really become a central element of any gender equality strategy, being at one organization level or at sector level. We're also exploring with partners the option of adapting existing online calculators or creating a new online calculator that would be really specifically designed for audiovisual employers to make it easy and possible for them to calculate their gender pay gap. We also have examples of surveys that have been launched to collect data on the gender pay gap in the audiovisual sector in order especially to approach this big freelance workforce. So the EFAD network has been running a small-scale survey within its membership. There is also a survey running now in the Netherlands, led by Vrouwen in Beeld, Women in the Picture. And finally, we believe that a lot can be done also at individual level. To close the gender pay gap, we have to promote pay transparency and break the taboo about discussing money. And the EU directive, it will also open perspectives there. So we really hope that we can push pay transparency and that we can all become more transparent so that it will be easier and easier for the next generations to know what their pay level should be and to better negotiate for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphne. Thanks a lot. And thank you to the panelists. It was really a great conversation to have and be able to have all of your insights have been wonderful. We do have about 4 minutes left, so I'm just gonna check the chat because I believe there was a question for Daphne. So specifically, yes, on the numbers. So in comparison with the French sector, with only 13% of women directors of feature films in animation in the last 10 years, that his numbers seem pretty encouraging, which I agree. So the question is if this is the result of voluntarist public policies, even if the glass ceiling remains, of course.
Desde luego, las políticas son muy importantes para cambiar la situación en la que estamos, ¿no? Y para que realmente esto progrese de una manera efectiva. Porque es verdad que es la única manera de asegurar, ¿no?, que las producciones y que desde la parte más corporativa, ¿no?, que suele estar más ligada a un campo más masculinizado, pues se hagan seguros, ¿no?, se estén seguros de que incluyen a mujeres dentro de sus producciones en puestos un poco más de liderazgo. Así que sí, yo espero que estas leyes no caigan y que continúen y que se extiendan a través de toda Europa, vamos.
Gracias, Daphne. Also, just maybe for Enrico, real quick, somebody was trying to confirm if EUROMEI now supports female-directed films at 25%. Was that the percentage that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, indeed. It's 25% for film directed by women, feature film. 25 is actually for men too, for documentaries. But whether for animation and feature films, it's 17 for male-directed films. It is 25% for female-directed films. So women, it's 25% across the board. Whereas for men, it's just for documentaries, and for men, it's 17.
Got it.
And also
Thank you
for
so
film
much.
co-directed, if there are 2 directors, one being a female, the percentage is 25%.
Got it. Thank you so much. I see another question from Marina, to which I will invite people to directly answer in the chat so that we can have archive and people can just copy paste their answer to do the research. Please suggest if there is any support or program for Ukrainian film director or producer who left the country. Thanks for that question, Marina. Yes, maybe one last question. Have you panelists insight into whether women can tell their own stories rather than have to tell male-oriented films, even when they are in writer's room or series?
Sí, desde luego este es uno de los problemas, ¿no?, que nos encontramos si no tenemos unas cuotas en puntos clave de liderazgo dentro de las producciones. Que al final es verdad que claro, que a lo mejor tienes pues yo qué sé, el director o la directora es una mujer, pero si el guión y la producción desde atrás está liderado por a lo mejor más una visión más masculinizada, pues puede crear un sesgo, ¿no?, de que realmente la perspectiva de género no esté en el corazón y el núcleo de la producción. Creo que esto es algo que poco a poco va a ir mejorando cuando si toda esta tendencia continúa, finalmente esta paridad será como total. Dejaremos de ver tanto purple washing, por decirlo de una manera, y será más todo con sentido, ¿no? La perspectiva de género estará dentro del corazón de las producciones y no será solamente pues una protagonista femenina o como simplemente tachar, ¿no? De la lista el que hay una mujer, pues ya está, no, sino será algo más serio.
Thank you so much, Tessel. Thank you. And we're now arriving at the closing time of our webinar. Thank you so much again for being here, everybody. I will leave the conclusion words to Edel Brosnan from EFAD Network.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Our aim today was to share the latest data and insights on the topic of gender equality in Europe's screen industries. Progress is slow across Europe and it is uneven. We have a long way to go, and that can feel frustrating because it is frustrating. This race was always going to be a marathon and not a sprint. But even so, let's look at some positives. First of all, this conversation is not happening in a vacuum. We are having it together, and some of the key partners in this conversation, EFAD, for instance, and EUROMEI, are making a real difference, not just through words, but through real concrete action. And we thank them for that. Secondly, we can at least track progress or lack of it because we have hard data. Not that many years ago, people told us this wasn't a problem because we didn't have numbers. Now we have numbers, everybody at least thinks it's a problem. On-screen visibility is rising, and that matters for the wider community and for the audiences, particularly young audiences. I'm really intrigued that although there were fewer female editors than male, they are working at the same volumes as their male peers. So what can we learn about the culture of editors? What's working well in that particular skills group? And of course, when a film is directed by a woman, or at least one woman, the number of women in other crew roles also rises. That really is encouraging. And as Daphne says, we really need to start looking at what's happening in the other crew roles. Are things improving for assistant directors, for example, for production managers? In European film, we now have a realistic picture of the gender pay gap, of the gender gap. When it comes to TV and streaming, the picture is less clear, but obviously the work by the European Audiovisual Observatory and Lab Femmes de Cinéma is really helping to close that gap. Across all industries in Europe, the gender pay gap is intertwined with the gender gap. The one influences the other. In our sector, as Daphne rightly pointed out, short-term contracts and freelance working is common. And we still don't have a proper picture of what's happening in terms of gender pay gap in the screen industries. Unequal pay makes careers harder to sustain. You know, to be quite honest, people run out of money and they have to go and do something else. And at an industry level, it creates a leaky pipeline in a sector that already has a skills shortage. This isn't just bad for women, it's bad for the creative industries too. And I would like to second what Mia said and what Dachil from Mia said, that women aren't just producing art and content, they are producing commercially successful programs that the audience likes. So it's bad business to keep women out of the as Daphne also said, everybody who has been here today, please get in touch with us if you have any existing data, surveys, or leads on the gender pay gap in your sector, in your country, whatever, or if you are planning to do any work in this topic in the near future. On our side, in the coming months, we look forward to continuing this conversation with our key partners, film funds, sector organisations and others. You know who you are. We hope that you will accept the challenge of working with us to close the gender pay gap. Finally, thank you to Enrico Vanucci from EUROMEI, Cineuropa from MIA. Thank you to Heller from the Austrian Film Institute and EFAD, Simone from the European Audiovisual Observatory, and Lisa Perrott and Fabian Silvestre from Lab Femmes de Cinéma. Thank you to Sarah, our moderator, and to all of you who turned up today for this important session. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care of yourself. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.